So in this video, I'm going to be talking about protein and just a few things that we need to take into consideration when planning your meals and why it's important to make sure that you are hitting your protein goals when it comes to your diet. And just a few tips and tricks here and there to help you maybe navigate through the crazy world that is protein and maybe even muscle building. So let's jump in. So first of all, proteins are also considered one of the macronutrients, like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are all your macronutrients. And that basically makes up our diet when it comes to our calories and so forth. So we've already spoken about carbohydrates and we'll be speaking about fats next up. But in this video, we're going to be focusing on protein and why it's important to really make sure that you are getting sufficient amount of protein in your diet. So first of all, protein is really important for building, repairing, and maintaining muscle mass in the body. So if your goal is to build muscle, you definitely need to be focusing on your protein intake. And in saying that, I actually want to recommend everyone to really be concerned about muscle mass because it is a benefit to have a good amount of muscle in your body. It's not to say that you need to be bulky or bodybuilding necessarily, but having a sufficient amount of muscle in your body is really beneficial for your health. But then also it increases your metabolism, which makes it so much easier to maintain your body composition when it comes to fat mass, and also just to help you to eat a little bit more without having to be too restrictive in terms of your calorie intake, seeing as it is increasing your basal metabolic rate. So when it comes to protein, we get two types of proteins. We get animal sources and we get plant sources. Okay, so animal sources, quite straightforward. That would be things like your meat, fish, poultry, eggs, and dairy. And then, of course, if you maybe on a plant-based diet, vegan, vegetarian, or allergic to any of the above that I've just mentioned, we then can also get protein from our plant sources like your chickpeas, lentils, black beans, your legumes in general, nuts and seeds also do contain protein. Things like rice and so forth also do contain protein, but we're actually looking at things that are considered to have a high protein content, and that's what I've basically just mentioned. So both of these sources are great forms of protein, and if, let's say, you are managing to eat, an animal-based protein, that's great, or even a plant-based protein, that's great. But there are a few things that we need to take into consideration when it comes to protein and your goals. So if your goal specifically is to build muscle, we definitely need to think about three things specifically when it comes to protein and building muscle. So just taking a step back, building muscle happens in the body when the muscle is broken down, and that's done through exercise, specifically more your resistance weight training types of exercises. So think lunges and squats and, push-ups and bench press or whatever the case may be, where you're actually putting on some weight or you're doing weight bearing exercises. It doesn't need to be with weight. It can also be with your own body weight, but it's not something like running or cycling or swimming, for example. Those exercises are still great, still recommended, but when we are looking or focusing on building muscle, we do definitely need to be focusing on more resistance types of or weight bearing types of exercises. So once you do any of these exercises, it actually breaks down the muscle, and then the muscle needs to rebuild. So what happens is when it rebuilds, it rebuilds stronger, and it is basically built up with amino acids. So our protein that we consume in our diet basically contains amino acids, which is the building blocks of this protein, and also the muscles in our body. So when it comes to animal sources of protein, they are actually more complete proteins. In other words, they have the full amino acid profile. They have every single amino acid present, whether you're having chicken, beef, eggs, dairy, or a fish, for example. Now, when it comes to your plant-based sources, unfortunately, we often refer to them as incomplete proteins, meaning that they don't necessarily always contain all of the amino acids. They might be lacking in a few here and there, and it also depends on which plant source you are taking, whether it's lentils or chickpeas or whatever. The only plant-based protein that really we can say is a complete protein would be your soy products. So thinking about soy milk or your tofu, for example. So there's three things we definitely need to take into consideration when looking at protein and specifically building muscle. We need to look at the digestibility of protein. We need to look at the amino acid profile, and we also need to look at specifically the amino acid leucine. Okay, so first of all, digestibility. So this actually basically refers to how easily it is digested by the body. And the easier it is digested, the easier it is for the body to actually use those amino acids and to build muscle. When it comes to animal products, They are easily digested, they're bioavailable, meaning that it's really simple for the body to really use that protein optimally for building muscle and also for all the other processes in the body. So even if your concern isn't necessarily to build muscle, but really looking at, the synthesis of hormones, enzymes, neurotransmitters, and so forth. So protein is really important, not just for building muscle, but for many processes, vital processes in the body as well. So digestibility, we see that animal proteins are a lot more digestible or easily digested, which means that they are more bioavailable, making it a lot easier for the body to actually, extract the amino acids and use it for the different processes in the body. In saying that, it's not impossible to get protein from your plant-based sources. Yes, it still is, but it is a little bit more difficult for the body. And I'm going to talk at the end more specifically what we can do to make sure that we are increasing the digestibility of plant-based proteins. The next thing is the amino acid profiles. I've kind of already spoken about that, where we see animal proteins have a full amino acid profile, and your plant-based proteins unfortunately aren't always complete. So in that sense, we definitely need to be focusing on a good variety when it comes to your plant-based proteins. You can't, you can't just rely on one or two different sources of plant-based proteins. You're going to have a variety in your diet. And then lastly, the amino acid leucine. So leucine is an essential amino acid that is really important in building muscle. We see that there's multiple studies that have been done to show that leucine actually has a significant impact on, building muscle. So we can definitely make sure that we are getting lots of leucine in our diet. So you'll often see your sports products or your recovery drinks or your muscle building anabolic supplements, for example, often do contain extra leucine added to it. So you can definitely, if your main focus is building muscle and you're on a plant-based diet, you can definitely maybe go to a health food store or just and try to find a leucine supplement and add that on top of your diet, just to make sure you are getting your leucine content in. So that's the three things we need to make sure of: digestibility, the amino acid profile, and leucine. So if you are following an animal-based diet, then you kind of already checking all the boxes, and you don't really need to be too worried about, supplementing your diet with additional protein if you are already eating it in your your meals as well, eggs or dairy or chicken or whatever the case may be. So in saying that, also when your main goal is to build muscle, you definitely need to be prioritizing protein. You need to be making sure that you have protein at every meal, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and even in snacks in between, and definitely also prioritizing your exercise, really building up your exercise as well, and adding that compounding weights and so forth to make sure that you are challenging the body to break down, to rebuild the muscles, basically. So just a quick last note on plant-based protein. So it might sound like I'm saying that you can't really achieve your weight, your muscle building goals or your health goals when it comes to following a plant-based diet, and that's actually really not the case. You definitely can. You just need to be extra mindful and extra intentional when it comes to choosing your plant-based proteins and also choosing your foods. So the very first tip that I can give you that's definitely going to assist with making sure that you are getting a full amino acid profile is to make sure you have variety in your diet. Have a variety of plant-based sources in your diet. Make sure you have lentils, rice, nuts and seeds, different beans. Make sure to incorporate some soy or tofu products, because we know that has a complete profile, so you're winning in that. Like I've mentioned, you can maybe do a leucine supplement or look for a plant-based protein shake or something that has added leucine to it. Often it'll state it on the label. And then lastly, to improve the digestibility of these proteins, you can do a few things. So firstly, you can maybe soak it overnight. So let's say you are going to use beans, you can soak beans overnight before you cook them. I mean, it's in any case kind of shorten the time that it takes it to cook. The same with nuts. I mean, if you're buying raw nuts, you can soak it a bit so that it can pull out some of the lignans that makes it a little bit more difficult to digest and phytates. And then you can roast it in the oven just to give it that crunch back. The same with also beans. If you don't really like cooking beans because it takes too long, having the canned beans is a good option, because the brine, basically it's being soaked for very long, also helps to remove a lot of the phytates and lignans that assist, that makes it a little bit more difficult for your body to digest. And make sure to rinse off the brine off of the beans to really to really make sure that it is more digestible. So those are, you can also, it's not as common in South Africa, but I think a few health food stores might have it. You can look for activated nuts and seeds. That's also basically just the process that I've mentioned, where it's been soaked and then, rebaked, just basically making it a lot easier to digest and easier to use. So that's it on protein. I hope this has been helpful. Let us know if you have any questions, and then I'll see you in the next one.